My name's Adriana. I am the Senior Safety Advisor with the Region of Durham and also within the Senior Support Unit with Durham Regional Police. The Senior Support Unit is a collaboration between the region and Durham Regional Police. A lot of people know of it as the Elder Abuse Unit. We have many different names, but essentially it is myself and Sergeant Anderton. And what we do is we go through police reports regarding anyone that is over the age of 55 who is vulnerable or may be vulnerable. We do follow-ups in the community. We do home visits. And then through the region, I get calls from concerned neighbors, concerned seniors, agencies about seniors that may be experiencing abuse and neglect. We're just going to go over the basics. If you have any questions, you can ask at the end. If you know of anyone who is experiencing elder abuse or you have questions about a specific case and you need support, I'll have my contact information up at the end so that you can call or email. So what is elder abuse? So it can be defined as a single or repeated act or inappropriate action occurring within a relationship where there's an expectation of trust. And this often causes harm or distress to the older person. And as we know, abuse, it can take various forms, such as financial, physical, psychological, and sexual, as well as neglect. And when it comes to neglect, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it can also be intentional or unintentional. The types of abuse that we're going to be going over today is emotional, physical, psychological, financial, sexual, and neglect. And Martin will be going over more of the financial piece. In terms of physical abuse, pretty straightforward. It's any form of direct or indirect contact that is intentional or unintentional towards a senior that causes physical harm, pain, or discomfort. Some indicators of physical abuse could be unexplained bruising, injuries that don't really add up to the story that the older person is telling, signs of being over or under medicated, and frequent accidents. Types of physical abuse include punching, kicking, hitting, grabbing, throwing objects. It can be indirect, pushing, slapping, pinching. Now I am going to show you a video. There you go.
Long day. I'm tired. Why don't you go play? That's it! That is the last time I trip over that thing! What is it you do all day? And pick that thing up!
So moving on to emotional and psychological abuse. This is any action or behavior that may diminish a senior's sense of well-being, dignity, or self-worth. Some indicators include fear, depression, anxiety, maybe noticing that the senior is more withdrawn than normal, low self-esteem, and some psychosomatic symptoms that may be new. And then types of emotional and psychological abuse include insults, isolation, threat, degrading remarks, intimidating and humiliating gestures, and then the added threat for older adults would be the threat to putting them into long-term care.
Where are you? What is wrong with you? The food not good enough for you? You're nothing but trouble. You hear me? You're useless.
Another form of elder abuse is sexual abuse. This can be common sometimes in long-term care. For those of you that may have loved ones in long-term care and may have experienced this with loved ones. So in long-term care, they do have to file a critical incident report with any form of abuse, such as like physical, sexual, or financial abuse. And so any type of non-consensual touching in long-term care, even if it's like holding hands or it's two residents that do not have a prior relationship that may like kiss each other on the cheek, that is considered sexual abuse in terms of older adults living in long-term care homes. And that's just to protect the rights of those people living there. Other than that, in terms of other situations outside of there, it would be any non-consensual touching behavior or remarks of a sexual nature or exploitation directed towards a senior by anyone. Some indicators of this could include fear around a specific person, bruising around the breast or genital areas, unexplained sexually transmitted infections, and this can include sexual touching, fondling, assault, inappropriate sexual language or joking of sexual nature. And then in terms of financial abuse is any misuse of a senior's money or property. This includes theft of money or belongings, forcing a person to sell possessions, wrongful use of the power of attorney document, or forcing someone to change their will. Some indicators could be that the senior can no longer afford rent or bills that they previously could afford prior to, excessive amounts of debt, another individual managing finances when it's not really necessary, lack of personal care, or unable to afford basic necessities. Financial abuse would include taking money without consent, forcing a senior to give money, romance scams, taking advantage of power of attorney responsibilities, and the sale of property or belongings without consent. So a lot of times we see seniors that are stuck in situations where they've been manipulated for many years by family members or a caregiver, and they are of sound mind, but they're choosing to give money. And so those situations are very tricky because although there's the fear and intimidation and they're often manipulated, they're still actively choosing to give someone that money. And so they really have to be saying no, and then the money is taken without their knowledge or their consent. Otherwise, they're consenting to that, even if they're being manipulated. So we still provide emotional support in those situations, but it can be really hard to determine that that's a crime in that situation.
Hey, baby, check the propane?
Yeah.
Oh, here. There. What's this? Why cash the check? Consider it a monthly allowance.
And what about the rest of the money?
I'm holding on to it for safekeeping.
But it doesn't even belong to you.
Hey, she's my mother. I know what's best for her, all right?
So you can see briefly in that video that there's obviously a power imbalance. And so with instances of abuse, there's often that power and control. And then the last type that we'll be talking about tonight is neglect. Neglect is the failure to provide a senior with the care and assistance required for health, safety, or well-being. This includes inaction or a pattern of inaction that can jeopardize their health or their safety. So some indicators include a lack of personal care, poor hygiene, poor mental health, maybe sudden, poor living conditions, poor physical health. They may be malnourished, dehydrated, under or over medicated. And then there's different types of neglect. So there's active neglect, which is intentional. This is when the individual providing care is doing this deliberately, withholding basic necessities of life to an older adult for whom they're caring for. So that's when there's that power and control and a power imbalance in the relationship. And then there's passive neglect, which is unintentional. That could just be the failure to provide proper care of an older adult due to a lack of knowledge. It could be due to caregiver burnout, or they're unaware of how to access local supports. And we do often see that, especially since COVID has started. A lot of people are overwhelmed. They don't want to have outside people in their home caring for their loved ones. And so they try to do everything until they can no longer manage, and then we get involved. And then there's self-neglect, which is also something we've seen a lot since COVID in terms of an increase in mental health, especially due to social isolation. What we know is that by 2050, the global population of people aged 60 and older is predicted to be more than double. So that's from 900 million in 2015 to about 2 billion. So incidences of elder abuse will be on the rise and will increase with people living longer and with seniors needing additional support. We also know that every month, 1 in 10 older adults worldwide experience some form of abuse. And I anticipate that that stat is probably a lot higher due to the fear of not disclosing abuse or not seeking support, especially since many seniors come from a generation where you don't air out your dirty laundry, you don't talk about things that are happening behind closed doors, and there's that pride and independence where it just makes it difficult to ask for help. And then we also know with only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse reported reported that it is much higher, as I had mentioned. Some of the risk factors, as you noticed in the short clips that I showed you, there was a child in the video. And so people often assume that it's the child that the person is yelling at or talking to. And I mean, that's a very interesting perspective because we know that we have children's aid services. We know that we have support for children that are at risk, but there isn't really so much support for seniors that are experiencing abuse. So between myself and Deb, and of course, Martin, who works in financial crimes, our unit is very small. So if you're wondering how often it happens or that it can't happen to you, these are some of the risk factors that could indicate someone could potentially be abused or neglected. So being frail, vulnerable, again, seniors can come from a very trusting place due to upbringing and a very different time in terms of generations. Social isolation can cause vulnerability. Some people might not be in the best situation, but they rather be with someone who may be a negative influence or who may be abusing them rather than be alone. There could be a past history. So that can be with intimate partner violence. That could be family violence, generational trauma. They could be accepting of the abuse and kind of minimizing it to be traditional or like this is their norm. Again, social isolation and then decrease in cognition. And so that could make the person more vulnerable as they could manipulate them easier. And then who can abuse a senior? Essentially anybody, anyone in the family, a spouse, a child, a friend, a caregiver, a stranger, when people get involved in scams. So that is all I got. But if you do suspect that there is somebody experiencing abuse or neglect and you do want to talk about it or you want more information on how to approach the situation, you can definitely give me a call. I do have Sergeant Anderton's information up right now, but if you just call the general number and just press 0, they can direct you if you need to make a police report. She's not in right now, but this is my contact information.